in this field, we learn something new. There's some environmental factors that are being studied, many of which have been looked at and discredited, and many that are being looked at, and those investigations in the environmental factors have become quite in depth, especially in different regions of the country. With autism, you see impairment in the development of social, communication, and behavior areas. There's differences in ways the brain processes information, and individuals with autism learn differently. How they pay attention is different, and how sensation impacts them is different. And those are some of the things that we hear from families, and most often are some of those sensory issues that tend to play a factor into many areas of the family's life. The diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorders, and the first thing they look at are persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction among multiple contexts. So not just in one place. They have these deficits in many different areas, at school, at home, in their community, at grandma's house, at church, all those places. And they'll see differences in social emotional reciprocity, how they understand, that's that reading of facial features and understanding other people's feelings, and understanding what crying, or what an angry face, and what a sad face, and those things that take a little bit more time to teach an individual that may have an autism diagnosis. Nonverbal communication for social interaction, some of that nonverbal communication that we all use, and we may not understand that we're using that nonverbal communication, but it becomes more difficult to teach, especially when you're not realizing you're actually using that. And then individuals with an autism spectrum disorder do have difficulties developing and maintaining and understanding relationships. And that can be relationships within their family unit, that can be relationships with other individuals and other peers at school. And sometimes that takes a little bit of outside influence and outside support to set those individuals up for successful relationships. Some of the other diagnostic criteria they look at are restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, and activities. And they have to have a minimum of 2. If they only are excited about dinosaurs and everything else can be fine in the world, that may not be falling into this diagnostic criteria. What they're looking for are those very restricted, very repetitive patterns and very narrow interest. You'll see a lot of stereotypical and repetitive patterns of behavior, different movements that you might see individuals with autism and may display more often. Insistence on sameness, where everything needs to be very routine and very rigid. If those restricted, with that rigidity in their routine changes, or there's a substitute teacher at school, or dinner is always at 5 o'clock and mom's running late, so it's not till 7 o'clock. Those things are very difficult for an individual with autism sometimes to be able to adapt to. They have very restricted, fixated interests, and they may become very, very, very smart in those interests. I was at a home with a family not long ago, and the little boy had very little language. However, he knew every name of every dinosaur and could say it appropriately. And, had difficulty explaining his needs, but could tell you which dinosaurs were pterodactyls and which ones were stegosauruses, and ones that I have no idea what the names were. And sometimes they'll have these sensory issues that are either very, very low reacted, where they very loud, very deep pressure. Some of those things are very hyper reactive, where any noise, any touch, any smell, any sound becomes very difficult to process for those folks with an autism disorder. Some of the other diagnostic criteria is that symptoms have to be present in early developmental period. They need to show those symptoms in that preschool, toddler age range. The symptoms cause significant impairment of social, occupational, and other areas of functioning. Those daily living issues become an issue, become a portion of this, where it's difficult for them to learn those self-care things, learn how to socially interact with other people, those types of issues, and then are not better explained by an intellectual disability, a global developmental delay, other genetic diagnoses, those type of things are not coming into play, causing these behaviors or these restricted interests. What they've looked at now, and this is in the DSM-5, the newest version, when they made the change, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about some of the changed wording of the DSM-5 next, but they are looking at severity levels in the DSM-5, and where they look at level 1, which is requiring some support. And individuals that might fall into a level 1 category can speak in full sentences, engage in communication, that also have that to and fro communication, and who attempt to make friends, but may have some atypical behaviors that fall into this. Some of that social interaction may become difficult, but generally need less of that one-on-one ongoing support as the other individuals that may have an ASD diagnosis. Level 2 is requiring substantial support, and individuals that fall in the level 2, they're described as being able to speak in simple sentences. Interaction is limited to those narrow topics. They'll talk to you, but only about video games. They'll talk to you, but only about dinosaurs or only about Transformers. And they do have some their difficulties in that nonverbal communication piece. Level 3, an ASD diagnosis that's listed as a level 3 diagnosis, requires very substantial support. There are some individuals with a level 3 autism diagnosis have few words. Sometimes they have no words. They'll rarely initiate interaction, and will sometimes initiate some interaction, some communication if it's to meet their needs, and may respond only with very direct questions or very direct social approaches. And so as you see the range as they look at with the autism diagnoses, the level 1, which may have previously been described as more of an Asperger's diagnosis, and a level 3, which may have previously been described as just a straightforward autism spectrum disorder diagnosis, or an autism diagnosis. But that DSM-5 that was released in 2013 did change all these diagnoses that fell into this autism umbrella: pervasive developmental disorders, autistic disorders, Asperger's disorder, PDD. We would see individuals being diagnosed with a PDD NOS diagnosis. Now, all the folks that had previously been listed as one of those other diagnoses now fall into the one category of autism spectrum disorder. In Arkansas, and this is specific to Arkansas, I know we have some folks in the group that are from some other areas, but specifically for Arkansas, they require 3 disciplines to make the autism diagnosis. The diagnosis must be completed by a psychologist, a physician, and a speech-language pathologist. This sometimes makes it difficult for families to seek a diagnosis, especially if they live in a really rural area that may not have folks that fall into these these categories to perform those evaluations and to make that diagnosis. I'm going to click over here real quick to make sure nothing else has popped up on anybody that had any questions. I'll try to do that every now and then to make sure we're not missing somebody's question. The next slide talks about the presentation profiles. And, one thing that I always try to explain to folks is that every child with an adult and teenager with autism presents differently. We do see a lot of characteristics that seem to be similar, but every person with autism is their own person that happens to have an autism diagnosis. And so some of the things that we do see when these individuals are infants even, is that they generally are described as either one or two ways. Very difficult babies. They don't feed well. They're hard to comfort. You can rock and walk and sing all night long, and it's hard to get them to settle. They scream and cry a lot. And when people will tell us they scream 24 hours a day, trust me, I believe you, they scream 24 hours a day. Picking them up doesn't help. Sometimes they're told by their doctors that this baby has colic, but their colic seems to last 24 hours a day and goes on for a very, very, very long time. Or they're very, very good babies who are happy to sit in their crib and don't really want to be interacted with, or just happy to play and watch their mobile, or to play and with the little crib toys that are there, and don't interact a whole lot, but seem to be quite happy and content on their own. Mine was the first baby here listed. I have an 18-year-old that has an autism diagnosis, and we screamed and cried 24 hours a day. It was a rough couple of years there. And some of the profiles that we typically see, some families will describe their child as a typically developing infant and early toddler, and then regression happens about 18 months, and they'll show us videos of this 1-year-old or 18-month-old talking and having words and having language and engaging with their family, and then you meet the child who's now 2 years old and the language is gone, there's no engagement, and they'll just tell you that this child looked like they just woke up one day and they were no longer there. Some people associate this with immunizations, but generally it's because that's the timing. And it's hard to say if that's actually something that's a cause and effect. If it was, we would all have autism because we've all mostly been immunized, but that is definitely something that has been in much of the research. Some of their developmental milestones tend to be out of order. You'll have children who will do things, and you look at those developmental checklists from the CDC and those type of things, and they're hitting this one and then this one over here and then maybe one over here, and they're not in that typical pattern. And sometimes that you'll see they'll be able to do one thing very, very well, and something else they have either no interest or no ability to do it at that point in time yet at all. And sometimes they'll have some isolated, like they could do puzzles. They could put a puzzle together at 2 faster than you could dump it out and start over. But they may not be able to use a spoon to eat with. You'll have high skills in some areas and low skills in other areas. And the diagnosis, and this is something that we work with a lot, can be done as early as 18 months. This is something that we still hear from providers, and we still hear from families that they're told they cannot diagnose that child with an autism diagnosis until they're 5, and that is completely untrue. The CDC says that you can be diagnosed as early as 18 months and very readily at 2 years. We do see children in our autism waiver program who are diagnosed that young, which makes a big difference, because you can begin that early intervention, and you can begin services for this individual much earlier than you would have if you waited until 5. There's just, you lose out on services that are even available at that point if they wait so long. Some research says you can see it as early as 6 months. The next slide, I was trying to put a picture of my little guy's picture coming out of the nursery, that newborn picture that everybody gets, and you get 55 copies of. His picture coming out of the nursery, he wouldn't make eye contact. His eyes are cut over as far as you could to the right, and he was actually in the NICU for a little bit. He was 2 weeks old, and already at that point wouldn't engage and wouldn't make eye contact. When we look back now and I see that, I'm like, well, what was I thinking? Why was I surprised at 2 when he was diagnosed? When I start looking back at pictures of when he was much younger, you can definitely see some of those characteristics much earlier. And and this next little phrase, that they're easier to get an early diagnosis when there's multiple children in the family. The children that we see in our autism waiver that we have gotten in very young are typically siblings of children we already have in the waiver program. And so that is definitely something that we do see differently there. The next slide, I'm sorry, is blank, because that's where I was going to put the picture that I couldn't get to attach a minute ago. I'm sorry. Some of the common misdiagnoses that we see with children and teenagers. Many teenagers who've not been diagnosed yet are some of the families that we do see in with other diagnoses when they finally get that appropriate autism diagnosis and we see them. They've also come to us with a long list of other diagnoses that they've tried to associate these behaviors with as this child's grown up. But we see many that have been given an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Many of the children that we see that have been given this an ADHD diagnosis and have been tried to be treated with stimulant medications and those that you would treat a child that didn't have autism with for ADHD. We hear very scattered reports of it was helpful, it wasn't helpful, it made the behavior very much worse. And so that's definitely something that families will come to us and say, we tried, and they'll give you a whole list of medicine that they tried and they all made it worse or brought out other behaviors that they hadn't seen before. And some it has worked on. So it's just it's very different to make a guess if medication would help. If it would, we would have all tried it. But we definitely see different reports from families related to medication for ADHD. Oppositional defiant disorder. Many of the children with autism are diagnosed with an ODD disorder, and many of those are given that diagnosis because of more of a communication issue as opposed to an actual truly oppositional disorder. If the child doesn't understand what you're asking them to do or does the last thing you hear, like when you say don't run, well, they heard you say run and guess what they did? They ran. And folks will take that as being oppositional when it truly is just a manifestation of their autism diagnosis. Bipolar disorder, we've seen young children diagnosed with a bipolar disorder when autism is truly the diagnosis. Intermittent explosive disorder and conduct disorders. Those are all really common things we see children come to us with on their list of diagnoses. And then how many children are there? That's a really hard thing to say because, excuse me, I got hiccups. And, the research and the investigation is limited to certain states, and we'll look at that in just a second. But the CDC has done ongoing studies, and it's called the ADDM studies, ADDM, and 11 sites were identified. Arkansas is one. Arkansas is one of the ADDM states. We've been in it since it began. The most recent publication was in 2020, and they collect data on 8-year-olds. And the way the data is collected has changed over the years, but initially they actually pulled education records from all 8-year-olds in certain areas of the states that they were looking at. And even if the child didn't have an autism diagnosis, but they had an IEP with certain things tagged, they would classify those children if they had some of those red flags of autism, even without a formal diagnosis. But the prevalence that they're seeing is 1 in 66 overall. One of the lower states is Colorado, and they see a 1 in 76. The highest state in the country, and it's always been the highest state, is New Jersey, and it's a 1 in 32. An overall of 1 in 32 children have an autism diagnosis in New Jersey. Here are the states that participate. Arkansas has done some of the participation in collecting data for 4-year-olds, 8-year-olds, and follow-ups on 16-year-olds that had been identified earlier in this study, and following up with those children are now teenagers at 16 to see if they had ever gotten a diagnosis, what services look like, and some of the outcome tracking for those individuals. Some of the other national data that we look at, boys are still much more readily diagnosed, 4 times more than girls. We are seeing more girls being diagnosed. Over the last 12 to 18 months, I've seen a much larger influx of girls being diagnosed, especially girls who are much older. This summer was almost at least weekly, I had phone calls from families of girls anywhere from 10 to 25 years old that had just been diagnosed with an autism diagnosis. And all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups are affected. There's no difference that they're seeing more in one group versus another group. And there's no difference in number of African American and white children. There continue to be fewer children with Hispanic children diagnosed, but they do see that across all racial groups within their data nationwide. Some of the Arkansas specific data, and this is kind of the tracking of numbers a little bit. In 2002, that Adams study, it was 1 in 145. So when my kiddo was diagnosed, and it was in 2005, we were still within that 1 in 145 count, because that were, they count every so many years. In 2010, it jumped to 1 in 65. So in those 8 years, we went from 1 in 145 to 1 in 65. In 2016, they changed their data counts, and they changed some of the areas that they were looking at, and they found it to be 1 in 66. So we're still hanging out about the same as we were back in 2010. Like I said, the Arkansas group is 1 in 66 overall, but of your boys versus girls, it's 1 in 41 boys. So out of every 41 boys, so just a little over a classroom in a school, maybe 2 classrooms, where there should be at least one statistically found child, little boy with autism. Of girls, it's 1 in 185, and that's 4.5 times more boys than there are girls. And as you get older, there are some services in Arkansas that just aren't available for kiddos as they've gotten older. Like the autism waiver, we have to get them in before they're 5. And so if they're 6 at a diagnosis, they missed an entire service plan that wouldn't be available to them at that point. But of white children, 1.4 times more likely to be identified than Black children in the same population, and 1.7 times more than Hispanic children. 33% of children get comprehensive developmental evaluations by their 3rd birthday, and that should be part of some of those well child checkups, or some developmental checklist, and finding those kiddos who may fall into an area that it shows that they're being flagged for some of the developmental problems, and then passing those children, getting those referrals along and done to some of the developmental centers, or a full evaluation done by the psychologist that can help do some of that, a speech pathologist that can help do some of that evaluation pieces. 81% of children with an ASD diagnosis were diagnosed by age 8. And so you're still missing 19% of those diagnoses. And like I said, we're seeing more kids that are, and teenagers that are being diagnosed at much older ages, which I'm glad that they're being evaluated and diagnosed. I wish they would have been evaluated and diagnosed younger, because you can work on some of that early intervention if you get them diagnosed early. The CDC, and this kind of comes up quite a little bit with some of the local providers, local family practice and pediatricians out in the state, and they'll call and ask, where do we get some of this information? And the CDC has modules. They have free medical and continuing medical training hours for physicians, for nurses, and for medical personnel, that explains the diagnosis, explains the early diagnosis, and what you do get the diagnosis, then what do you do? And they have lots of items available for providers. If you have we have a lot of families that help their physician as they're coming in and asking, going, but this lady says they can be diagnosed early. Every doctor I've ever talked to, when we've sent them the CDC stuff and we visited with them about it, they're always so excited to get it, because many of them just honestly didn't realize that you could diagnose early. Some of the causes that they look at for autism, there are probably many different causes. A lot of the researchers will look at autism as the autisms, because they think there are probably so many different subsets. Some of the theories that they look at are a blend of the genetics and the environmental factors. As they're looking at some of the genetic factors, and you have a family that has multiple children and only one has an autism diagnosis, what's the difference in that one? they've done studies with this for many years. Matter of fact, we were one of the first studies in Arkansas. They started with 4 families, and we were one of the 4. And the child that they wanted more information on was my neurotypical daughter. And so they actually did lab on her multiple times. We did multiple questionnaires on her. Carson had a paper trail, and we knew his diagnosis, and they were looking to see what was different genetically, environmentally, all of those things of why one child may have autism and one does not. Genetic testing, they found identifying causes in about 50% of the cases of autism, but about 50% of those, they still don't have that genetic report or something just written out for a family of this is why your child may have autism. Some theories is that individuals with autism are unable to filter toxins at a cellular level, if I can talk today, and particularly their glutathione. They look at their methyl B12, folinic acid, and some of those studies have been quite interesting and actually started here in Arkansas as well. Exposure to toxins is another thought, and that some of those environmental toxins or some of that oxidative stress that they talk about that infants and young children may have experienced at some point in their early childhood, early development. The other thing that they look at is this triad of a gut, immune system, and brain dysregulation. And this is something that we see a lot, particularly with the GI issues with children and adults and teenagers and all the folks that may have an ASD diagnosis. Many of those families will tell us they always have had a bad stomach. They've always had chronic GI issues. Some of the diagnoses that we see, like I said, with some of those earlier slides that come in, and we see a lot of individuals that have an autism diagnosis that have high anxiety. They have anxiety diagnoses, and many of those are found through issues related to they don't understand the language. They may not understand what's happening next. And that's one of those things that as you're talking with someone with autism and you're giving them all these verbal directions of first we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, the auditory piece doesn't process well, and then they become very anxious because what are we doing next? You know, they said we're going to go to all these places, but I don't know which one we're going to go to, and it doesn't look like we're driving the right way, and all these things build onto each other. They have some regulation disorders, some of those sensory disorders that we talked about, and like I said, the auditory stimuli, sometimes just anything auditory is hard. It's much harder than those visual things. You give them a list with pictures of these are the things we're going to do, and they can mark those off as they go. It's much easier to process than the auditory, the telling them things. You can over talk it, and I'm a talker, and that was something I had a really hard time learning of say it once, let it process. And that's become something that we do here a lot at our house. And folks with autism diagnoses sometimes have difficulty looking at people in their face. They actually will, you know, if they talk to some older individuals with autism, will tell you that looking at someone's face gives them that fight or flight. It scares them. And so it's much easier to communicate and talk to someone if you don't look at them. The immune dysregulation, we've got lots of families and children who report multiple different immune disorders, metabolic issues, and those GI symptoms. This is a study that was done back in 2006, and it was in the Journal of Developmental and Behavior Pediatrics, that 70% of children with ASD were found to have lifetime history of GI symptoms such as abnormal stools, constipation, frequent vomiting, and abdominal pain. They'll describe a lot of, you know, fluctuating diarrhea versus constipation issues, vomiting that can occur with no true illness. The child's not ill. They don't have a stomach virus, but they can throw up. And then just abdominal pain that's sometimes very difficult to explain. And if you have an individual who has a difficult time communicating any kind of pain, and they have abdominal pain every day, and they're not able to tell you, hey, my stomach really hurts and I really don't want to eat and I really don't feel good, the next best way they have to communicate is through behavior. And that's one of the things we see a lot on children that have some very, very, very intensive, especially self-injuring behaviors. And you drill down a little bit and try to figure out what's going on in this child's body that's making them so miserable. And it generally comes back to abdominal issues. And so that's definitely something we see a lot of. And some of the ways they process information cognitively is different. And like I said, sometimes they need longer periods of time to process. And when you're the talker mom, it's really hard not to just give him a whole list of things he needs to do. And he got maybe the first one. And so we'll get with that in just a little bit again, but sometimes they generally always process information that's more concrete. If you give them direct information of what you need, that's what you'll get. The Gestalt processing, they don't analyze their situations well. They don't see the whole picture. As some people will describe it, they can't see they don't see the forest for the trees. They see every individual tree, literally. And they need sameness, and for predictability, they need that routine. That's something that we really see here a lot too, is we need a set routine, and a routine generally that's written with some sort of schedule that we know what's going to happen next. Changes in the environment are very disrupting. Whenever everybody went home all of a sudden in March for COVID last year, we heard from many families just that routine changed, the environment where their child was doing educational work changed, and that was very, very difficult for many individuals. They tend to learn very rigid rules. Like if you say, this is how we're going to do it, this is how we're going to do it forever, unless you teach a new rule. They have that splintered, unusual development that we were talking about, where they may have really great math skills, but have a very difficult time reading, or have really great reading skills, but can't actually comprehend what they've read. That's where we sit sometimes, is he could read you anything in this world, but the comprehension of it's hard. They need that longer time to process, and transition is very difficult as well. That not knowing what's going to happen next, it's hard for their brains to move from one thing to another because the previous thing's not finished yet. And so it makes those transitions really, really difficult. Some of the speech and language issues that we see and that we work with a lot is their expressive language may exceed their receptive language. You may have an individual who can tell you all kinds of things, but may not understand what you're saying to them at the same level they're able to express their own language. And that becomes misconstrued a lot of times, is that they're not paying attention, or that they're deliberately not doing what you're asking them to do. They may just not understand what you're telling them to do. They learn very specific to very general, kind of like that. You don't see the forest for the trees. You're looking at every specific tree before you ever see the forest. Whereas typically developing individuals will see the whole forest, and then they'll look at all the trees. And that's how they'll learn things. They'll learn the whole topic, a little, the overview, the umbrella, and then you start working on each of the harder little, the smaller pieces of those things. They may not follow or use natural gestures. It's hard to just say and expect them to know that means come on. I hope y'all all saw me do that. And I always forget I'm on this little tiny camera. And they may answer rhetorical questions in church. The preacher might say, well, how is everybody today? And guess who's going to say, I'm great, out loud in church. And that's just how that happens. And they begin to become very dependent on verbal prompts. And that's something that we fell into here, is that we didn't do the next thing until I said the right words. And when he was little, he would never leave a room until you said, see you later, alligator. And he'd say, after a while, crocodile, and he would leave. The school nurse, that was how she got him out of her office every day when he came in for his seizure medicine. See you later, alligator. And sometimes the speech can sound very stiff or very robotic-like and very monotone. The robotic-like is the best way, to describe that speech that sometimes happens. Some of the language that we also see is echolalic. It can be immediate echolalic, where you say, hi, Carson, and he says, hi, Carson, back to you. Or it can be delayed, where you say something and then 2 days later, he's saying it back to you. It can always be those things that you really don't want them to repeat too. That was something we learned here fast. If it's a word that you don't want them to say, that will be the first one we would say back. Scripted language, where you would see lots of individuals who can recite most all of an entire movie and could tell you, you know, where it starts and the next phrase and the next phrase and the next phrase directly in order before they ever say it in the movie. Sometimes you'll have these monologues where you get like an entire lesson on all the dinosaurs that lived during a certain era of dinosaurs, or all the weather that happens in Kansas, or all the weather that happens in Florida, because it's different than the Kansas weather. And they had very literal interpretation of language. Some of the things that we're still working on are some of these idioms that we know what they're saying, but when you actually read the words and think about the literal meaning of the language that's being said, we understand why that there's a problem there. But put on your listening ears and they'll look at you like going, I only have these ears and I don't have a special ears for listening. Or hold your horses, and they're going, but I don't have any horses. And that would be the answer we would get. My head's about to split. It's raining cats and dogs. That was the first idiom we ever got. And he was so excited to tell me he learned special words. And I'm going, oh Lord, what special words today? But it's raining cats and dogs really means it's not raining cats and dogs. It's just raining hard. And it was so exciting that day. Or I'm so full I could explode, because then they're going, holy cow, I better move because something gross is fixing to happen. She's fixing to explode. And so some of the concrete processing that goes right along with that very concrete language, and these are, me throwing mine under the bus here, my kiddo, here's some of the things that he said one day last year in flu season. I said, are a lot of kids at school sick with the flu? And he looked at me like, hello, kids don't come to school when they're sick. Well, I hope not, but yeah, no, I understand that now. And then this was several years ago, but I told him, I was getting ready to get in the shower, and I said, hey, put all the towels in the washer. So I'm in the shower and I see the shadow of the door opening, and I look, stuck my head out and said, what are you doing? And he was putting all the towels from under my cabinet on the counter, because every towel we own, tea towels, kitchen towels, hand towels, the bathroom towels, every single towel we owned in our house was in my washer. And so we had lots of clean towels that day. And I'm the one who told him to do it. And you really learn, you get what you ask for. I had a question this year in some of our school that it took a very long time. And finally I said, baby, just answer what you're going to answer. But the question was, how do you think you would feel if your brother was mean to you? Well, he doesn't have a brother. And he wrote, I don't have a brother. And I went, fine. I'm not, we could have gone over that for days to get that process piece through his. Yeah, I'm talking about you. He's here doing his schoolwork. He just took his headphones off. Some of the eye gaze and use of eye contact can be different. Like I said, they have that fight or flight to actually make eye contact sometimes. And so you'll see them look past you, look over completely to the side. Perspective shifting is absent. So it's hard for them to understand that other people may not think or be listening to the same things they are. If they have headphones on, nobody else can hear that but them, and that is very difficult to understand. Difficulty with turn taking, that's something we see in a lot of preschoolers. They don't understand that it's not your turn. If they want to do it, it's their turn and it's time to go. Difficulty making friends, difficulty reading the mood or feelings of others, which fall into that difficulty making friends. If you see somebody that's all, looking like they're in a bad mood, and you come over there having no idea that that's something that they're feeling, and interact inappropriately for that situation, that's very difficult. Difficult in initiating and maintaining interaction. It's really hard for them to come up and go, hey, how are you? Or start that interaction. They sometimes you'll talk to some of these kiddos and with autism, or adults with autism, they'll say, we really want to do that. It's just very difficult to start. And sometimes once you start that interaction, they'll carry right along and it's a great conversation. And you'll see a lot of the stereotypical behaviors and rituals, collecting of curious items, and shiny things, rocks, leaves. There's all kinds of things will come into houses, and families will go, every day he comes in with 19, pennies and anything shiny from school, and they get in trouble for stealing things at school. No, it's just really shiny and they've got to hold it. Intense preference for clothing, food, and sounds. Sometimes we like really loud noises. Sometimes we cannot stand noise. Certain clothes, if you find something that they wear and that's the only thing they'll wear. I was the mom who bought, 10 pairs of the same pants or shirt. Foods that are very specific, and it's not just we'll only eat bacon, sausage, and Lay's potato chips. We're talking Lay's potato chips. It cannot be the Walmart brand. And if you put the Walmart brand in the Lay's bag, he will know. Trust me. I've tried. With a lot of work, that got better. The food spread out. We eat anything I cook now, just about. Hypersensitivity to touch, sounds, and visual stimuli or smells. Like I said, sometimes that any kind of noise, and that they see those hands go up with the slightest small little noise, or smells that are bad, skunk smell. You got to get rid of that. And that's really hard to get out of your car in Arkansas when you've driven past a dead skunk in the road. These senses and use senses in an unusual manner. We'll see lots of smelling inappropriately, lots of licking things or putting things in their mouth, different things like that. And I'll even see kids who'll do a visual stim out of the corner of their eye. And the family will say, well, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what he's doing. But he's looking at everything right out of the corner of his eye as a visual stim. Some unusual body posture or movements. We see lots of flapping, especially when they're happy. And sometimes families will be, they'll see it when they're upset. They'll also see it when they're happy, and they'll go, but look at Christmas morning, and they'll show you a video and they're so excited. And then you'll see some of that flapping, some of the toe walking, a lot of finger posturing will happen with kids with an autism diagnosis. But like I said, everybody with an autism diagnosis is their own individual with an autism diagnosis. So you may not see all of these. You may see some in one area, some in another area. It's just very, there's not a specific individual list of you have every single one of these. You have this one and this one and this one and this one. And at grandma's house, you may have this one and this one. And it's very, very individualized, to say the least. And so I'm going to kind of open up the next little bit. If y'all have any questions or anything, I'm going to try to jump over to the chat box and see if we can catch any. Let's see.
There was one, Renee.
Oh, yes, see that one about the occurrence in more in boys than girls. Something that we do see, like I said, we're seeing more. Ooh, that's kind of a strange screen. I don't know if y'all are seeing that too or not. And we are definitely seeing more girls being diagnosed than we had in the past. We're seeing the girls that are being diagnosed previously, and this is very anecdotally, previously a lot of the girls that we saw being diagnosed were much more impacted and had many more behaviors than what we're seeing now. And we're seeing some of the girls diagnosed that may not have as many behaviors, but have a lot of that social difficulties. So I think as we do the next round and the next round of some of the data collection for the ADAM studies, we probably will see more girls being diagnosed. I don't know how far up they'll, how much they'll catch up to the boys, but I think that also pulls into that piece related to the genetics. Where are we looking at genetics? Is there, are we seeing something that's affecting more of the boys than the girls because it's a genetic issue? But it is, a very interesting piece. And that's one of the things that's when we were a piece of that research group that they were really looking at is what's the difference? What does her genes look like compared to his? And, it was a blind study, and we got some of that information just because I started asking questions as they got a little bit older, but, their genetics were the same. There wasn't much difference that would have explained it genetically between the two. Are there any other questions that y'all have? Anything? Oh, let's see, there's a Q&A on here too. Okay, somebody asked about how do you deal with autistic children who have a fascination to water? And we see that as an issue of two ways. I've seen kids who at school, they can't get them out of the water fountain, can't get them out of the toilet, can't get them out of the sink. They just want to play with it. And we've also seen kids who have a fascination with water and have a creek behind their house or have a pond or live at the lake. that live close to large enough bodies of water to cause a drowning. And so, you know, both are addressed in, you know, what is the piece of the water that they're so fascinated by? Is it the water itself? Is it the visual of the water running? We've seen a lot of kids who we really thought they were obsessed with the water, but it turned out that they were more obsessed with the visual. It's that constant run to look at. And working on some functional behavior plans or functional behavior assessments, and getting some behavior planning done that, one, addresses the safety of it, addresses giving them another route to get that same, whatever it is they're looking for. If it's the actual water itself, give them some way to play in the water that doesn't involve the pond that's, you know, walking distance from the back of my house. You know, and working with families on making sure those things are safe. When we were little, we had alarms on all the doors because he was the quietest kid. My other one could walk through the house and she sounds like, you know, a herd of something coming through. You hear her from the time she sits up to the time she gets to where she's going. He can walk through, and he's bigger than she is, can walk through our whole house and you never hear him. And so it was always a concern that he could get out and we would never know. And it was a concern, and it happened before. And so definitely working with some of your professionals that can work on finding that what is the need that's being met by the water, and how do we meet that in a safe way, in a way that you know, how do you stop that interaction at school if they're playing in the toilet? You know, what is it that they're needing? Are they watching the water spin? That was an issue we had one time with a little girl that played in the toilet. Well, no, she was just flushing and watching it spin and watching it spin and watching it spin. And so finding her another, it was a spinny toy thing that had a water spin in one of those lighted up ball things. That she could watch spin around as much as she needed to, and avoid the toilet, because that's just unsanitary. Even as clean as you could probably try to get your toilet, I wouldn't want mine playing in it either. Any other questions? Let's see. How do you deal with children who won't wear pants? That is another thing that we do see sometimes with kids who are very sensory aversive to certain fabrics, certain, you know, elastic on their pants, or anything like that. And so it's really working and watching those behaviors, and when are they taking off their pants? Have they gotten into a situation where it's become habit, they get home and they take off their pants? Or is it a sensory thing because they honestly can't stand their pants the way it feels? Is it something that they're only doing at a certain time, a certain place, with certain pants? And working with some therapists and folks to try to figure out what the issue is and how do we give them something else to work with that, or change the routine that every time we sit down for story time we take off our pants. Well, you put a belt on long enough just to slow the routine down, and can change that every day this is what we do to every day this is what we do. Something stopped me for a minute, and can redirect that a little bit. And you know, and like I said, all kiddos and adults and teens with autism are all different. And so it is very hard to say this is what will work for this one, because what works for this one may not work for that one. But we were the kid who took our pants off at story time. And that's what we did the first few weeks of kindergarten. And his kindergarten teacher called me one day and just said, "Hey, I really hate to bother you." And we started kindergarten in a general ed kindergarten classroom, and it made my mom heart nervous, but we did great and had an amazing teacher. But that was one of the only calls she ever made to us that year, was he just takes his pants off every day at story time, and can you put a belt on him? And I'm like, well, you're going to have to help him in the bathroom because we don't have that, you know, we're not able to do that part. And she goes, "Oh, I'll help him. It's okay. We'll figure that out." And she goes, "I think if we just slowed him down, I could redirect him and we wouldn't have a problem." And that was the last day he took his pants off at story time. But it literally was just stopping that, that routine that he had. Okay, let's see the next one. The next question in the question box is the individual is saying that the descriptions sound like her own child. He gets very upset if daily routines is changed, and he's always very picky about his clothing, food, etc. He's 7. Could these possibly be signs of a possible level 1? They could be. It's hard to say. If the sensory pieces, or you see individuals who are just diagnosed with a sensory processing disorder, that by itself, they don't have the language issues, they don't have the learning issues, and so it could be just a standalone, he has the sensory processing disorder, and these are some of the things to work through that, versus a full autism spectrum disorder. But definitely, if it's something that's interfering with his daily living, with the clothing being so specific, the food being so specific, those toys, and we play with the same toys, and then you better leave them in that spot where he left them. And if you clean his room and they're not there, it's not a happy afternoon when he gets home from school. I definitely think, having an evaluation will not hurt anybody. That's always my answer. I get that question a lot of, do I need an evaluation or not? An evaluation won't hurt anybody, and at least would give you a little bit of information of what can I do to help him. Yeah, he gets very upset if you move his stuff. Yes, that is something that, like I said, and we can see that in kiddos with an autism diagnosis for sure. That's something that we see a lot. But I also have known and met many kids who didn't qualify fully as an autism diagnosis, but definitely qualified as a sensory integration disorder diagnosis. And so I definitely think that probably would be worth looking at. A lot of times for the sensory integration disorder, they work with occupational therapists who work with them to overcome some of these things. And how do we overcome the fact we will only wear blue sweatpants from Old Navy? And they have to be the Old Navy ones. Don't go to Walmart because Old Navy's already closed. Some of those things, they can kind of help process through some of those really rigid preferences. Let's see if I have somebody else here. Oh, okay. Some of the resources, and actually I've got, this one is asking about resources for parents who need essentially respite care. They're asking about a babysitter, but parents of individuals that do have autism need a break. I completely understand that. There are different resources available. I've set my slide, my last contact slide up that has my email and my phone number. If you don't know your Title V nurses, and if there's any of you Title V nurses on there, I'm throwing y'all all out there. Who jumped in on one of my last webinars I did for centers. They have a ton of resources and are very helpful, and might be able to help direct y'all to services in your area. They're located throughout the state. And if anybody has questions and needs more specific contact for folks that are closer to your area, if you'll shoot me an email, I will be more than happy to get you more specific information. I hate to give you like the person in Fort Smith if you live in Jonesboro. And we can get you the right person to talk to, because there definitely are some resources out there. And I completely get, yes, you need a break. It's nice just to be able to, we would get somebody to watch Carson when he was little, and people would see us out at Walmart, and they're like, well, what are y'all doing? I'm like, we're at Walmart by ourselves, and we're just walking around. I don't even know what I'm buying. Some of those things that you just need that break and that time to kind of recharge yourself a little bit. Anybody else have anything? I think we've got about 3 more minutes.
Renee, this is Lorena. Hold on, I'm going to cough, of course. What if who can the parents contact for early intervention?
For early intervention, they are also housed throughout the state. There is a central phone number. Let me pull up my tip sheets real quick. I've got this little list of tip sheets, and I think I've given it to y'all before, Lorena, but I'm not sure, so I'll send it to you guys again. And one of the things that I have on there are different resources for the Title V group, the EI folks, which are your early intervention folks, and they're housed throughout the state. And you can call and make your own referral as a mom, as a teacher in the classroom, as grandma, whoever you might be in this child's life. You definitely can reach out and make those referrals. And the early intervention folks start services at birth. and carry on until the child's 3. And at 3, they help transition that child to the 3 to 5 programs with the education co-ops in the public schools. And so they're a wealth of great information and great services for families who have younger children. In those tip sheets, there are information on the 3 to 5 programs and those education co-ops. So if your kiddo is still little and not school age yet, and you're looking at what do I do because we just turned 3 yesterday, there's information on that in there too. And I'll get that to Lorena, and you are welcome to send that out to everybody in the group. It's Arkansas specific, but if folks that are watching from outside the Arkansas area have questions, feel free to message me, and I'll see if I can't help y'all find something that might be in your area.
Yeah, I know there's different aspects of autism. You kind of question it early on. And like I have a friend, her son wasn't diagnosed till he was 25 years old.
Yes.
And she just kept saying, and she's a teacher, and she just kept saying, you know, all these things. And finally at 25, you know, and so it's nice to, if you've got that tip sheet that we can share, so that, because there's a lot of professionals I see on here as well, that I think this would be a good tool for them.
Yes,
to have
it's all in one place. That's what I think most people are going. It's all just nice to have together. But it does have your Title V folks. It's got information on the EI programs, the 3 to 5 programs, different things that families just have asked us a lot about, that it was just easier for me to finally go, here, here is this. Hope that it's helpful. And it's gotten more, people have been more excited to get it than I really expected.
Yeah. Well, your wealth of knowledge, and I think this is your 3rd with us, and we've got a 4th one coming up, December the 15th, and it's going to be at 10 in the morning. And it's called Intro to Positive Behavior Supports, right?
It'll be a kind of a positive behavior support training that we did previously was like 2 months long. It was long. So this is a very broad overview, but it gives families some information and professionals some information on what it is, and what, you know, as we have teams that go out and work with some of the developmental disability provider agencies and things like that, what they're actually talking about when somebody asks for a positive behavior support plan for those individuals. We did all the training for the developmental disability provider agencies. And it's just a very, very broad overview of that.
Well, I'm excited for another training. I think, let's see. Was there another question? No, that was it. Okay. And I can talk to Charlotte. She asked me a question. I'll just send her an email. But anyway, I want to thank everybody because I think I'm good for till 3 o'clock, and we're just past it. Thank you for your patience in getting this all getting it on in the beginning. But if you have any questions, I'll be sending out a copy of this recording, as well as everyone will get a certificate of attendance. So if you have any questions, just shoot us an email. And thank you very much. And you're the host, so you just exit us out.
I'm going to try to get us out of here. My screen's being silly, though.
Okay. Well, because I know Katie somebody put you as a host, so I can't do it.
Yes, let me get over here to where my.
Okay. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. I appreciate everything. Let's see, now maybe I can get us out.